In a few days, the election will be over. And no matter who celebrates victory on Tuesday night, for conservatives, this election will touch off a deep and painful process of reflection. Will Republicans lose this election because they've lost touch with their base? Were social values sacrificed for political expedience? And has the bedrock philosophy of small government and low taxes been replaced by ballooning deficits and taxpayer bailouts? This is Election Countdown, View from the Right. And in the next hour, we will examine how this election is playing out and what's ahead for the conservative movement. Hi, everybody. I'm David Brody, senior national correspondent for the Christian Broadcasting Network and a CNN contributor. And let's get to the first question. Here it is. How would you characterize the McCain-Palin ticket as we head into Election Day? Amanda Carpenter, townhall.com. You first.
It seems like now, even in these late days in the campaign, they're still trying to revitalize the base, which, you know, with a few days to go, it seems like they should be a little bit more independent-minded.
Let's keep moving around the table. Editorial writer at the Washington Times, Brian DeBose.
I think the ticket has some serious problems from the very beginning. You had a McCain who was not very well liked by your more religious conservatives, and you had Sarah Palin who comes in unknown. People start to sort of like her, but then it's very uncomfortable with whether or not she has experience or not. So it's always been a mixed bag ticket that doesn't have a solid message going forward.
Kevin Madden, former Mitt Romney spokesman. What's your take?
Well, I think it's the Maverick ticket. It's the two people that were best, I think, positioned to offer a message of challenging the status quo in Washington in what I think everybody would agree is a change election.
Stephen Hayes, Weekly Standard, senior writer.
I'd say they're finding their voice. It took them a long time, but in the last few days of the election, they're finally finding their voice. They have a coherent message. I'm
real curious to get your opinions on this one, because John McCain was always talked about as this perfect, ideal candidate to run in an anti-Republican mood in this country. Do you buy that? Do you believe McCain was indeed the perfect candidate to run? Brian, what do you think this year?
No, I mean, McCain had problems within his own party. You can't start an election off with problems in your own party. Then you have to go out and solidify your support in that party. That leaves out any Democrats who you may be able to sway. It leaves out all independents you may be able to sway. You know, even if you're talking about independents, they're Republican-leaning independents who can move back and forth. They're generally going to go with you. McCain probably had those people locked up from the beginning, but then in his effort to go back further to the right, and get the base, the red meat-eating base out for him, he sort of lost these people. And now he's trying to get them back and
Yeah, I mean, as the one guy that made the argument during the primaries that John McCain is exactly the wrong person to lead this party, I think I have a, I have a very interesting perspective on this. We lost the primary. When the contours of the race started to emerge, we saw, I think, a lot of Republicans did see, especially up on Capitol Hill, who were worried about their own political fortunes, saw that John McCain is the one Republican who's consistently outpolled the Republican brand among the wider electorate in a year where we were facing a very toxic environment. And I think his greatest ability was that he was seen as somebody who was a person of accomplishment on Capitol Hill, somebody who was always oriented towards solutions rather than ideology. And that was the John McCain that we expected to reach out to conservative Democrats and like-minded independents. And I think what's happened is that we just haven't been successful with a very methodical message to reach out to those swing voters, and that's why we see ourselves struggling right now as the closing days.
I think Kevin's exactly right. I mean, if you look at the Republican Party today, the brand is in tatters. You ask Americans across the country whether they identify more with Republican Party, with Democratic Party. I mean, Democrats have a lead, and pollsters will debate this, but 8 to 10, 12 points maybe. What I think John McCain brought was a kind of Republican that could appeal to independents, as Brian said. He made himself, the reason we know John McCain was because he defined himself as sort of the anti-Republican in some senses. You go back to the 2000 race, he sort of emerged on the national stage because he wasn't George W. Bush. He was a more moderate, maverick-y version of George W. Bush. You look at the way that he ran in the primary. He was not the Bush Republican, and it was a liability at times in the primary.
So I wonder then at this point if the Sarah Palin factor comes into play here, because we have polling numbers. I want to show you a poll here. This is from CNN Opinion Research. In October, 41%, that's her unfavorable rating. Sarah Palin's favorable rating. Look where it was in August, 21%. As you can see, it's gone up big time. It seems like John McCain has had to indeed
make the Palin pick to satisfy the base because he had problems with the base to begin with? Amanda?
Absolutely. I think the Sarah Palin pick was kind of go big or go home. John McCain couldn't have run the traditional campaign in this environment. He had to do something so dramatic that it would really get the public's attention. And Sarah Palin absolutely satisfied the evangelical base because she's so pro-life. And he had to make that pick because people were so unsure about his conservative instincts, and that helped him convince those voters.
So the jump ball, Sarah Palin.
I kind of agree with what Amanda was saying. I think that the pick was made originally as a calculation towards disaffected Hillary Clinton voters and a lot of suburban independents and suburban conservative Democrats. And I think the biggest challenge that the campaign faced was when you put out somebody who is so unknown as Sarah Palin is on the national scene. The challenge is that you only have 70 days with which to introduce her to the American public and that electorate that you're trying to swing. And the problem is that your opponent also has 70 days. And I think in that 70 days, the Democrats did a better job of framing her as somebody who was disqualified in the minds of a lot of these swing voters. And that's been the greatest challenge. She has absolutely satisfied the base. She has absolutely energized and probably closed an enthusiasm gap. But I think, going back 5 months, I think a lot of the McCain campaign folks would have told you that if we run a base election, we run the risk of losing by about 5 points.
The problem with what they did is, and they may not have had a choice, is they had to introduce Sarah Palin at the expense of, letting John McCain be out there. She sucked up all the energy in the room. And I mean, once you got back to looking at John McCain, the base sort of looked at him. They tried to get him to move a little forward and, hitting back on Obama and some of the things he was saying. And then he just didn't seem to want to do that. And so it just brought them back to, this is why we don't like this guy. This is the problem we have with this guy. And it just didn't work.
And she's been under attack. I mean, clearly especially from these intellectual conservatives we hear about. I want to show a graphic real quick of Peggy Noonan from earlier this month, and I'm sure you all know about it, but here's what she had to say. Sarah Palin is a person of great ambition, but the question remains, what is the purpose of the ambition? She wants to rise, but what for? This is not a leader. This is a follower, and she follows what she imagines is the base, which is in fact a vast and broken-hearted thing whose pain she cannot actually imagine. Tough words, and I wonder, is there this disconnect, this idea of these intellectual conservatives trashing Sarah Palin, yet she's connecting with the base, Stephen?
Well, I mean, imagine a politician being ambitious. Now, I'm shocked to hear that. Look, there are some legitimate questions raised about Sarah Palin. I mean, I think, for me personally, I think the real question is she doesn't need to be an intellectual, but is she open to ideas? Does she want to learn? Is she intellectually curious, I guess, would be the thing that I want to know, and we may find out over the next several years. But look, there's a divide to a certain extent among intellectual conservatives and among the base, among the country. But I think that divide is being overstated. I mean, you have intellectual conservatives like my editor, Bill Kristol, who have been staunch defenders of Sarah Palin. You have other intellectual conservatives who have taken up for her at every turn, have made the case for her. You have people at National Review magazine who have made these arguments rather strenuously. So I think there's a divide. People have different opinions. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I wouldn't say that the Palin question leads to this, is a manifestation of a huge split among Republicans.
Okay, well, we could do 6 hours on Sarah Palin, but I think we'll move on. So please stay right where you are. We really have only begun to chat. Straight ahead, is national security the lost issue of this campaign? Election Countdown, the view from the right will continue in a moment.